More than a gimme duffel bag and a sticker to recruit people to the Army these days, much less to get them to stick around once they do join. And yet the Army has a large and crucial recruiting need. That's one reason it's created a new specialty, talent acquisition technician, and a special school just for them. It's all part of the larger workforce transformation effort. We get the latest from the lead officer in charge of workforce redesign, Colonel Christine Rice. Colonel Rice, good to have you with us.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here today.
And the Faculty and Staff Development Chief of the Army Recruiting and Retention College, Zenon Zacharj. Mr. Zacharj, good to have you with us.
Hey, good morning, Tom. Thank you.
All right, so let's begin with the basics. What is prompting this, and how does it fit into the larger Army transformation picture? Colonel Rice?
So, Tom, I mean, that's a great question. It's a great point, right? So the Army published a report in July of 2023 based off analysis and findings of a study that focused on our Army accessions enterprise. And for the most part, over the past 50 years, recruiting has been a success story for the Army. But in the last 26 years, we have identified that the Army failed to meet that accessions mission a handful of times. And we started to see a significant decline, specifically related to the delayed entry pool, since about 2014. And I think, Tom, you might be tracking, right, that we have missed our recruiting goal the past few years. We made it this year, but the past few years, we missed that recruiting goal along with some of the other services as well, right? And so as we have studied the dynamics and the change, right, as we look at the nation's economy, culture, and demographics and technology, the demand to compete for that labor market has become more critical, right, in order to, like you said, attain the talent, and how do we keep and retain the talent over time? And that's really what's been driven here. And the targeted workforce redesign, Tom, is focused on the fact that, really over the past few decades, we have been changing or adapting, right, some of the tools and the organizational design of recruiting, but we've never really targeted the actual recruiting workforce, right? The people that are conducting recruiting and engaging with the youth of America and the private sector. So that's really what has driven this change here.
Okay, and then we have the Army Recruiting and Retention College. And is that a physical college, and what goes on there, Mr. Zacharj?
Right. So yes, the United States Army Recruiting and Retention College, it really focuses on teaching 18 courses to two part of the human capital part the Army has. One is the recruit, and then one is to how to retain those that we do recruit. Again, there's 18 courses here coming from your basic levels of how to be a recruiter to allow those leadership and senior leadership courses of how do you manage a recruiting force or a sales force. The same thing when it comes to retention, right? We spend a lot of effort to identify Americans to become soldiers. How do we retain those soldiers?
Right, and this could be separated types of functions. In other words, the recruiters are constantly bringing in new talent every year. There's these goals, and they're regionally based, et cetera. When it comes to retention, it could be 2 years, 4 years, 10 years later, and the original recruiter is nowhere near that soldier at that point. So that it seems like the retention would need to be more, the ability to know what it takes to retain people needs to be more widely diffused. Would that be a good way to put it?
Right. So that's a good point, right? So when it comes to the retaining the workforce, you think about the different generations that are currently making up the Army. There are different skills and I guess theories of how do you retain a younger generation versus the senior generation, and all of that is what's being discussed in our classrooms.
All right, and getting back to the recruitment piece, what have we learned? What has the Army learned in recent years, recent months about what it takes to recruit someone off the street versus the way they did it 10 years ago or 50 years ago?
Right. So, go ahead, Z, and then I'll respond.
Sure. So Tom, that's a great point, right? So in Army recruiting, we've really been created to be as agile as possible when we're looking at the recent trends when it comes to the landscape that we operate, right? Who are we trying to recruit? What of those generations, and really, what are those eligibilities of those who are trying to recruit to try to make this mission, right? So in the last years, we're seeing some identifiers that, hey, we have to adjust the way we do it. And again, to Colonel Rice's words of who is helping us to get to that mission. Therefore, 420 Tango, this chief warrant officer, was really looked at, hey, this is a possibility that we can really meet this new need and Colonel Rice?
So I think one of the probably salient points we need to hit, Tom, here is right. What's changed? Like what symptoms have led to this over time? And so as the the enterprise study examined a few of these points, we've also seen that both our academic partners and industry partners have learned quite a bit of this as well. That some of those symptoms, right, we're seeing that young people are making decisions later in life, and so we're typically, the typical chase is for, right, those kids that are coming out of high school, like that would be the primary targeted market. Right. We also have a declining eligibility problem, right? And so you can either physically or cognitively not able to meet the criteria to join the service. It go without saying that COVID-19 had a significant impact here, right? And then also some declining trust in institutions, right? It's that declining trust. The Army essentially polices itself, right? We put out in the media what's going on within the Army. When there's a bad news story, it is out there. We are discussing the good and bad parts of what happens in our industry, right? And so declining trust in institutions, and then of course a strong economy is a strong labor market, and so the competition is fierce to get at and target those folks. And so we've had to adapt, much like the private sector has had to adapt, using tools, using different techniques to target a generation that is not like the generation that's currently serving in senior leader roles in the Army.
We are speaking with Army Colonel Christine Rice. She's the lead officer in charge of workforce redesign, and with Zenon Zacharj, a faculty and staff development chief of the Army Recruiting and Retention College, both part of the Army Recruitment Command. And in teaching people to become talent and retention people, how much of it is psychology and understanding the lifestyle and being able to speak in the language of potential recruits, and how much of it is data analytics and understanding who should I be reaching out here? Should my appeal be depending on what characteristics I know about people? It seems like there's a psychological and also an analytical side to this.
Go ahead, Zenon.
Sure. So that's a good point, right? When you're looking at let's start from the top. Recruiting operations and retention operations, it's complex. It's 100% complex. There's a service that we're trying to teach and influence people to say, hey, this is something I want to be part of, right? So back to your question, Tom, of like, hey, how much is it psychology? How much is it like a skill based of, we'll say, some sort of persuasion and influencing, right? It's really woven in. And Colonel Rice had mentioned, leaning into what currently industry is doing and trying to pull some of those best practices into how do we train that Army recruiter or that retention person. That's something that we've done critically, with some specific tools to make sure we get that balance together, right? This chief warrant officer that we're speaking about today is neat because they're at a mid-level to an executive role where they're looking at recruiting operations, pulling in the data analytics, some marketing, some recruiting operations, and really compiling it so they could advise the commanders on how to make some real good decisions in that recruiting operation space. So again, back to what you're saying is I bring in those specific requirements, psychology, and some of those hard skills and bring them together so that person has the skills to do their job.
And what has the demand been for people that want to become talent acquisition technicians? Because it's not exactly the point of a bayonet, so to speak.
So I was going to say on that point, we've actually seen a high number of applicants that are interested in becoming a talent acquisition technician, Tom. Both from the warrant officer community itself, which is where we started, right? Currently serving warrant officers that we know already possess extremely high technical capacity in their career fields. And we can go a little bit and expand into how we've assessed and selected when you're ready to talk about that. But then also the non-commissioned officers that are both in the currently serving, right, the 79 Romeo recruiter community, right? Because as you know, Tom, typically a warrant officer comes from its technical community on the non-commissioned officer side. And so we've seen a drive from that community. And then, of course, when we opened it up to the greater Army, right, we had a huge influx of applications, and so the demand signal in terms of how many positions there are to recruit, right now we've seen that it's, at least in this first year, it was fairly easy to get the necessary number that we needed in year one. to get to school and target what we're going to put in that workforce.
I guess it's good PR for the recruiting command to be able to get its share of recruiters